Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, My Hero Academia, Symbol of Hope, by Alton White. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin. Superman plus My Hero Academia crossover. From a young age, Clark knew he was different. His parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, knew it too. To them, he is both Clark Kent and Kal-El of Krypton. He had always been both to them, ever since he first arrived on Earth from a world beyond. The night Kal-El came to them was unlike any other in Smallville. The sky was clear, with stars shimmering in the vast expanse, but the stillness was shattered by a streak of light as a glowing, fiery object tore across the Kansas sky. It moved with incredible speed, blazing a trail through the atmosphere, leaving behind a trail of burning light. Jonathan and Martha Kent, who had just finished a quiet evening on their farm, were the first to see it. Jonathan stood on the porch, gazing up at the unusual light in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a meteor, but the trajectory didn't match. It was heading straight toward them. Without a word, he grabbed Martha's hand, and together they ran toward their truck. "What is that, John?" Martha asked as they sped down the dirt road, the light growing brighter and closer. Her voice was tinged with both fear and awe. "I don't know, Martha, but I'm going to find out," Jonathan replied, gripping the wheel tightly as they followed the light. Within moments, the object crashed into a nearby field, sending up a plume of dust and fire. The earth trembled beneath them as the impact shook the ground, but Jonathan didn't slow down. When they arrived at the site, they saw something extraordinary. It was a small spacecraft, nestled within the crater it had created, glowing softly as the heat dissipated. For a moment, both Jonathan and Martha were speechless. This wasn't a meteor or any debris. It was something different. Something alien. "What is that?" Martha asked, her voice trembling, but there was no fear in her expression. There was only wonder. "We should find out." He extended his hand to his wife, signaling her to hold on to it. Together, hand in hand, they walked closer to the crash site. They approached the wreckage cautiously, the heat still radiating from the small pod. Jonathan moved forward and, with a gloved hand, touched the exterior. It was smooth and metallic, unlike anything he had ever seen before. As he leaned closer, a soft hiss escaped the vessel, and the top slid open, revealing something they could never have expected. Inside was a baby boy. Surprisingly, here wasn't a scratch on him. Not even after the crash. He looked like he was only a few months old. He was wrapped in a soft, red cloth that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the night. The baby's blue eyes were wide open, and when he saw the Kents, he smiled, reaching out toward them with tiny hands with a little laugh. Martha's heart melted instantly as she heard his little laugh. "Jonathan," she whispered, stepping closer to the pod. "Look at him. He's just a baby. But where did he come from?" Jonathan's mind raced. The craft, the crash, the boy. It was too much to take in. This is impossible." Martha knelt beside the pod, gently lifting the baby into her arms. Despite the otherworldly nature of his arrival, the boy felt warm and real, just like any other human child. He cooed softly, snuggling against her as if he had found the comfort he had been searching for. Martha felt an overwhelming surge of maternal instinct. "He's not from here, Jonathan, but he needs us. Look at him." She glanced up at her husband, her eyes pleading but full of resolve. "We can't leave him." Jonathan looked from Martha to the baby, torn between the impossibility of the situation and the undeniable fact that this child, whoever he was, wherever he had come from, needed help. It didn't matter that he came from the stars. He was a life, that was all Jonathan Kent needed to know. "We'll take him in," Jonathan said after a long pause, his voice firm. "But we can't tell anyone. Not about the spaceship, not about where he came from. If people find out," he didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood. In a world that feared the unknown, a baby from space would be seen as anything but human. They couldn't let that happen to him. Martha held the baby closer, nodding. We'll raise him as our own. The decision was made at that moment. From then on, this boy, this alien child would be theirs. They would raise him with the same love, care, and values as if he were their flesh and blood. And no one would ever know the truth. They named him Clark Kent, after Martha's maiden name. He grew up on the farm, surrounded by love, but always with the secret of his origins hovering in the background. As he grew, so did his powers, but the Kents always reminded him to stay grounded, to remember the values of humility and kindness. They didn't know what the future held, but they believed in their son. In those early years, Jonathan and Martha often wondered about the ship hidden in their barn, about Krypton and the world Clark had come from. But every time they looked at their boy, they knew that none of it mattered. What mattered was that Clark was theirs, and they had made the right choice that night, beneath the stars, amidst the wreckage of a distant world. Clark's powers began manifesting when he was only 3 years old. Those powers include super strength, enhanced senses, and invulnerability. And many more. But, since quirk registration happens when a child turns 4, Clark was tested like everyone else in America. When Clark Kent finally turned 4, it was finally time. His parents took him to the local clinic in Smallville for the quirk checkup. It was a quiet, sunny afternoon, and the waiting room was filled with other children, most of them excitedly talking about their quirks. The small, peculiar abilities that had begun to manifest in many of them. By this age, it was expected that children would start showing signs of their quirks, even if just a subtle indication of what they might become. Clark sat in the waiting room, legs swinging off the edge of the chair, while Jonathan and Martha sat beside him. They hadn't talked much about quirks in their household. The Kents were practical people, focused more on hard work and kindness than the power or abilities one might possess. Yet, in a world where having a quirk was the norm, they couldn't ignore it. As the nurse called their name, the Kents stood and led Clark into the examination room, exchanging nervous glances. Like all parents, they wanted the best for their son, but deep down, they were anxious about what might happen. Clark had already started showing signs of unusual abilities at home. Strength beyond reason, speed that defied logic. But the little boy had no idea that his powers were far beyond what most people experienced. They weren't possibly quirks. The local doctor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a soft, reassuring demeanor, greeted them with a smile. "Ah, the Kents. Let's see how young Clark is doing today, shall we?" he said, gesturing for Clark to sit on the examination table. Clark hopped up, his legs dangling as the doctor began his checkup. "So, has Clark shown any signs of a quirk yet?" the doctor casually asked the Kents as he checked Clark's reflexes and peered into his ears. Jonathan and Martha exchanged a brief look, thinking about what to say. After a few seconds, Jonathan cleared his throat. "Well, there is nothing we can point to, Doc. He's a strong boy, but nothing out of the ordinary yet." The doctor nodded, taking notes. After the physical examination, he performed the standard tests to check for a quirk. He began by analyzing the bones in Clark's toe, which was then followed by a genetic scan. Both procedures had become routine since the quirk phenomenon took hold worldwide. Clark sat quietly, swinging his feet, oblivious to the significance of what was happening. To him, it was just another doctor's visit. But for Jonathan and Martha, this moment felt heavier. They didn't know how to explain Clark's gifts, and part of them feared that if anyone learned the truth of where Clark had come from, they would lose him. After a few minutes, the doctor stepped back and smiled at them, but it was tinged with something else, sympathy. "Well, everything looks perfectly normal physically, but I'm afraid there's no sign of a quirk developing in young Clark." He flipped through his notes before adding gently, "I'm going to declare him quirkless." The word quirkless hung in the air heavily. For most parents, it would have been a bitter pill to swallow. In a society where nearly everyone had some kind of ability, being quirkless could mean a lifetime of discrimination, limited opportunities, and standing out in ways no one wanted. It wasn't impossible to live a good life without a quirk, but it certainly wasn't easy. Martha inhaled sharply, glancing at Jonathan. For a moment, there was relief in her heart. Clark wasn't about to be moved into a world of quirk-powered expectations. However, there was also concern because she and Jonathan both knew the truth. Clark wasn't quirkless. He was something far beyond that. An alien. Quirkless. Are you sure, Doctor? Jonathan asked, his voice steady, though he already knew what the doctor would say. The doctor nodded. Yes. I've checked everything. Clark has a second toe joint, but the doctor rubbed the back of his head before continuing. It was a rare case for him. His genetic markers don't align with any known quirk traits, and his physical scans show no signs of quirk development. It's rare, but it does happen. Clark's perfectly healthy, just like anyone else, but he doesn't have a quirk. Jonathan and Martha exchanged another glance. They knew what they had to do now. They had to keep Clark's powers a secret. If the world knew that their boy wasn't just quirkless but something else entirely, people would start asking questions they couldn't afford to answer. Thank you, Doctor, Martha said, her voice quiet but composed. She gave Clark a gentle smile and took his hand. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. As they left the clinic, Clark's hand in hers, Martha's mind raced. They had always known that Clark wasn't like other children. They had seen him lift things far too heavy for someone his age, run faster than he should have been able to, and shrug off injuries that would have left any normal child in tears. But now, the world would see him as something even more unusual, quirkless. Back at the farm, Jonathan and Martha sat Clark down, their hearts heavy with the responsibility they now carried. Clark, honey, there's something important we need to talk to you about, Martha began softly, sitting beside him on the couch. Jonathan stood nearby, arms crossed, his expression serious but kind. The doctor said I don't have a quirk, Clark said, his innocent voice full of curiosity. Is that bad? Martha shook her head, placing a hand on his knee. No, Clark, it's not bad. It just means you're different from the other kids. But that doesn't make you any less special. Jonathan knelt in front of his son, meeting his gaze. What the doctor doesn't know, Clark, is that you're more special than anyone can imagine. There are things about you things we'll explain when you're older. But for now, we need you to understand something very important. Martha looked at Jonathan, then back at Clark, her voice filled with both love and caution. You have to be careful, Clark. You can't show everyone what you can do. Not yet. People wouldn't understand. They might be afraid. Clark's young mind didn't fully grasp the gravity of their words, but he could see the worry in his parents' eyes. Okay, Mom. I won't show anyone. And from that day on, Clark Kent, in the eyes of the world, was quirkless. It became the foundation of his disguise. To the world, Clark Kent was an ordinary boy, seemingly powerless, living in a world where almost everyone else had abilities. But beneath that facade, Clark continued to grow, his powers manifesting more and more each day. His strength, speed, and otherworldly gifts were hidden, nurtured in secret, waiting for the day the world would be ready to know who he was. But for now, the world believed he was just another quirkless kid, living quietly in Smallville, raised by two loving parents who loved him just the way he was. Clark thought the same until his parents revealed the truth about him. It was an unseasonably warm day in early spring, just after Clark Kent's 12th birthday. The farm was quiet except for the distant hum of a tractor and the chirping of birds in the nearby trees. Clark had spent the afternoon helping his father repair one of the fences, his chores long finished. He knew that he was stronger and faster than any of his friends, but his parents had always told him to be careful, to hold back. He didn't understand why, but he trusted them. Still, the questions were beginning to mount. Lately, he had started noticing things that didn't make sense to him. His strength was growing, far beyond what even he could hide. And then there were the strange incidents. Like when he accidentally threw a football across the field, far out of sight, or when he heard a conversation between two neighbors from over a mile away. He didn't talk about it, but the fear of what was happening gnawed at him. That evening, after a quiet dinner, Jonathan and Martha sat down in the living room, the soft light of the setting sun casting long shadows through the windows. Clark could feel something was different. His parents exchanged a glance, one filled with unspoken understanding and a trace of worry. "Clark, can you come sit down for a minute?" Jonathan asked, his voice gentle but serious. He was standing by the window, looking out at the farm. Martha sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. Clark, sensing the importance of the moment, came in from the kitchen and sat on the worn armchair across from them. He glanced between his parents, the feeling of unease growing in his chest. Something was wrong, or at least, something was different. Martha smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Clark, there's something your father and I need to tell you. It's something we've kept from you for a long time. Not because we wanted to, but because we thought you weren't ready to hear it. But now we think you're old enough." Jonathan turned from the window and sat down next to Martha, his face thoughtful. "Son, you've probably noticed by now that you're not like the other kids." Clark shifted in his seat. "Yeah, I've noticed. I'm stronger. Faster. But it's not just that, is it?" Martha and Jonathan exchanged another look. It was time. "Clark," Martha began, her voice steady but full of emotion, "you didn't come from here. You didn't come from Earth." For a moment, the words didn't register. Clark blinked, his young mind trying to wrap itself around what he had just heard. "What do you mean?" Jonathan cleared his throat. "You're not like the other kids, son, because you're not from here. You're not from Earth. You're from a planet called Krypton." Clark's heart skipped a beat. He didn't understand. Krypton. A planet. It sounded like something out of a comic book, not real life. But his parents were serious, their faces full of the kind of weight that only truth carries. I don't understand. How? How is that possible?" Clark asked, his voice wavering. "What are you talking about?" Martha reached out, taking his hand in hers. "When you were a baby, your father and I found you. It was late at night, and there was a crash in one of our fields. We went to investigate, and there, in a small spaceship, we found you." "A spaceship?" Clark whispered, his mind spinning. Jonathan nodded. "Yes, son. We'll show you. Come with us." Jonathan and Martha walked out of the house with their son, guiding him to the barn, where they hid the rocket that brought him to this world. The rocket that sent the baby into their lives. Jonathan was the first to explain everything to Clark. "You were just a baby, wrapped in a blanket. We didn't know where you came from at first, but we knew you weren't from Earth. Your BRTH parents sent you here on the ship, to be safe. And ever since that night, you've been our son." Clark took a few steps back, stunned by the realization. He tried to process what he was hearing, but it was too much. He came from Krypton. A spaceship had sent him to Earth. He saw the spaceship before his eyes, and yet, he still found it hard to believe. It was all so impossible, yet as his parents spoke, something clicked into place. The strange abilities he had, the things that made him different, it all started to make a kind of terrifying sense. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice small. He wasn't angry, just confused, and a little hurt. "You always told me to hide what I can do to control myself. Is this why?" "Because I'm not human." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "We didn't tell you because we wanted you to have a normal childhood. We didn't want you to grow up feeling like an outsider, like you didn't belong. We love you, Clark. You may not have been born to us, but you are our son. Always. But yes, we told you to hide your abilities because we don't know what people would do if they found out. The world's not ready for someone like you. You're quirkless, and yet, you're powerful." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice firm but compassionate. People are afraid of what they don't understand, Clark. If they knew that you came from another planet, they might treat you differently. They might be afraid of you. They might hate you. We wanted to protect you, to give you time to grow up without that fear. But now that you're older, you need to know the truth. You're not like everyone else, and you have to be careful. The world isn't ready to see what you can do. Clark's mind raced. He was from another planet. Everything he knew about himself was different now. His entire identity, his place in the world, had shifted in an instant. And yet, as he looked at the love in Jonathan and Martha's eyes, the concern on their faces, he realized something important. They still loved him. He was still Clark Kent, their son. No matter where he had come from, no matter what he could do, no matter how different he was, they were still his family. "So I'm from Krypton?" Clark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The name felt strange on his tongue, like a word from a dream. Martha nodded. "Yes, Clark. Your real name, the name your BRTH parents gave you, is Kal-El. But to us, you've always been Clark Kent." The barn fell silent for a moment, as Clark absorbed the weight of this new truth. He was Kal-El of Krypton. But he was also Clark Kent of Smallville, Kansas. These people had raised him on this farm, and he knew deep down that they were his real family, no matter what. "What do I do now?" Clark asked, looking from his mother to his father. "What does this mean for me?" Jonathan placed a hand on Clark's shoulder, his grip reassuring. "It means that you have a gift, son. You have the power to do things no one else can. But with that power comes responsibility. You need to keep who you are a secret for now. The world isn't ready for someone like you. Not yet." Martha added softly, "You can still help people, Clark, but you have to be careful. We don't know why you were sent here, but we believe it was for a reason. One day, the world will be ready, and when that time comes, you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be. But until then, we'll be here to help you figure it out." Clark looked at them, his heart full of conflicting emotions. He felt fear and confusion, but also love and hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he could face it with his parents by his side. For now, he would keep his secret, and he would continue to live as Clark Kent. As the quiet, quirkless boy from Smallville. Clark Kent's teenage years were a delicate balancing act, one filled with quiet self-discovery, hidden struggles, and the constant tension of living a life divided between who he was and who he had to pretend to be. The sleepy town of Smallville, where everyone knew everyone, was a sanctuary and a prison all at once. Clark was just the tall, strong boy from the Kent farm to his friends and neighbors. A good-natured, hard-working, and reliable boy. One who would offer his neighbors a helping hand whenever they needed it. But beneath that unassuming exterior lay a growing storm of powers, secrets, and a future he wasn't yet ready to face. By the time Clark entered high school, his abilities had become impossible to ignore. He was growing higher, faster, and stronger, and his senses were becoming sharper by the day. He could hear conversations taking place across the town, and see things happening miles away, and his strength had reached the point where even the smallest mistake could have catastrophic consequences. The powers he had once struggled to understand as a child were now part of him, integrated into his daily life, but controlling them was a constant battle. Jonathan and Martha Kent had done their best to guide him through these changes. They had drilled into him the importance of restraint. The importance of hiding his true self from the world. "People fear what they don't understand, Clark," Jonathan would remind him. "And what you can do well, it's beyond anything anyone else can. They're not ready to know you." Still, there were moments when Clark's powers slipped out, despite his best efforts. When he was 15, during a school football game, Clark had been playing defensive end, trying to blend in with the team and not attract too much attention. But in the heat of the moment, when the other team's star player, a boy known for his quirk that enhanced his speed, came rushing toward him, something inside Clark snapped. Without thinking, Clark tackled the boy. But he tackled him too hard, too fast. The boy was thrown several yards back, crashing into the grass with a sickening thud. The crowd gasped, the referee blew his whistle, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Clark stood there, staring at the boy, horrified at what he had done. He hadn't meant to hurt him, but the true extent of his strength had come through in that instant, despite all his efforts to hold back. The boy was shaken but ultimately unharmed, thanks to his quirk protecting him. Still, rumors had spread that Clark was hiding something. Some whispered that he had a latent quirk that had suddenly surfaced. Others believed he was just lucky. But from that day on, Clark stayed away from sports. It was too dangerous. He couldn't afford to lose control like that again. There were other moments too. Like the time he helped lift a tractor on the farm that had gotten stuck in a ditch, forgetting for a brief second that a farmer was watching. Thankfully, that farmer, Old Man Colder, was a bit out there in his advanced age. His claims were quickly dismissed. There was also a time when he instinctively used his super speed to catch a stack of falling hay bales before they hit the ground. Each time, he would play it off, offering a sheepish grin and an awkward explanation, as if it was just sheer dumb luck. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was walking a tightrope, and one misstep could expose everything. His teenage years were also marked by a growing sense of isolation. While his classmates were busy discovering their quirks, testing their limits, and preparing for careers as pro-heroes, Clark was forced to hide the very things that made him special. He wasn't quirkless. He was something else entirely. But to the world, he had to appear ordinary. His strength, his speed, his invulnerability, they weren't the gifts of a quirk but of his alien heritage, something no one could ever know. This sense of isolation grew more pronounced as Clark entered his late teens. He watched his friends apply to hero schools, chase their dreams of becoming pro-heroes, and live their lives openly, while he had to pretend to be something he wasn't. There were times when the weight of that deception became almost unbearable. He longed to use his abilities to help people, to make a real difference, but his parents' warnings echoed in his mind. "The world's not ready for you, Clark," Jonathan would say. "One day, it might be. But not yet." Martha would always remind him, "Your time will come, honey. But until then, you have to be careful. We know it's hard, but it's for your safety and theirs." Clark understood. He loved his parents and trusted them. But as he grew older, the longing to embrace his true identity, Kal-El of Krypton, became harder to ignore. During these years, Clark's emotional growth was as challenging as his physical development. He began to feel the weight of responsibility more heavily. He often found himself standing at the edge of his parents' farm, looking out over the fields at the distant horizon, wondering about the people of Earth and the life he was living. Who was he? Was he Clark Kent, the son of Jonathan and Martha? Or was he Kal-El, the last survivor of a distant planet, sent to Earth for a reason he didn't yet understand? Well, he knew the reason his BRTH parents had sent him to Earth was that they wanted him to survive the planet's destruction, but they didn't tell him anything else beyond the reason that ultimately led him to Earth. He still had to find his purpose on Earth by himself. They said so in a holographic message, triggered as Clark mustered the courage to touch the spaceship for the first time. The questions weighed on him, especially during quiet nights when he could hear the world suffering through his enhanced hearing. He could hear cries for help amidst accidents and disasters. All of them were answered by the appearances of heroes, which were the licensed pro-heroes, or even some vigilantes. There were times when he wanted nothing more than to leap into action, to use his abilities to save the day. Just like the pro-heroes, but he knew that if he did, there would be questions he couldn't answer. So he held back, knowing that he could do more but was forced to remain in the shadows. Despite this inner turmoil, Clark never resented his parents. He understood their fears and shared their longing to keep his secret safe. They had sacrificed so much to protect him, and he loved them deeply for it. They had given him a home, a family, and a sense of belonging in a world where he should have been an outsider. But as the years went on, Clark couldn't shake the feeling that his destiny lay somewhere beyond the borders of Smallville. During his high school years, he continued to help his neighbors and his community in quiet, unnoticed ways. He would wake up before dawn to finish chores on the farm, then secretly fly out to the edges of town to lend a helping hand to those who needed it. Whether it's fixing roofs, clearing rocks from tractors' paths, lifting cars stuck in ditches, uprooting dead trees or stumps on the fields, and even saving the occasional stray animal in distress. All the while, he maintained the illusion of being ordinary, of being quirkless. A kind quirkless boy. Soon, he became a prolific writer. Clark's active search for truth allowed him to decide his path to be a journalist. He knew he could make a difference through his writing, just like his powers. He applied for college and received a degree in journalism in 4 years. He had planned to take a job as a journalist in the city, a job that allowed him to go anywhere he was possibly needed. He would be a journalist while doing heroic acts in secret, just like what he had done in Smallville. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to keep his secret, Clark always felt a growing sense of anticipation, as if his true purpose was waiting for him just beyond the horizon. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew that one day, he would have to step into the light, to reveal himself to the world. But until that day came, he would continue living the life of Clark Kent, the quiet, humble, quirkless farm boy from Smallville. Though it weighed on him, Clark never stopped believing that his powers were given to him for a reason. He wasn't ready to reveal them yet, but when the time was right, when the world truly needed him, he would be ready. He had faith that his parents' guidance and the lessons of restraint, humility, and compassion would one day lead him to embrace his destiny. As his teenage years came to a close, Clark stood on the threshold of adulthood, unsure of what the future held but more certain than ever of one thing: the world may not have been ready for Kal-El, but Kal-El was slowly but surely getting ready for the world. But when he had just turned 24, the world came for him. It was just like any other afternoon in Smallville. It was quiet, warm, and peaceful. Clark had been working on the farm with Jonathan, the sun hanging low in the sky as they moved through the familiar rhythm of their chores. The air had been thick with humidity all day, but no one paid it much mind. Spring in Kansas often brought heavy rainstorms, but what came next was beyond anything the town had ever seen. Clark felt at first, a strange pressure in the air, followed by an eerie stillness. He paused in his work, his keen senses picking up something unusual in the distance. A faint roar, low and rumbling, was growing louder by the second. He turned his head toward the horizon, squinting against the setting sun. His heart skipped a beat as he saw it, a dark, swirling cloud slowly descending from the sky. A funnel was forming. A tornado was coming to Smallville. "Dad," Clark said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get inside. Now." Jonathan turned, following Clark's gaze. His expression shifted instantly from calm to alarm. He grabbed Clark's arm and pulled him toward the house. "Martha!" Jonathan yelled as they ran. "Get to the cellar. Tornado's coming." Inside the house, Martha had already sensed the shift in the weather. She was at the door, waving them in frantically. "Clark, Jonathan, hurry," she cried, glancing nervously at the approaching storm. The roar was growing louder now, the wind picking up debris and tossing it into the air like toys. The fast wind in the air voiced out a whistle of danger. But Clark wasn't moving fast enough. As his parents raced to safety, he stood rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the massive, dark funnel as it touched down in the fields just outside Smallville. It was bigger than anything he'd ever seen, a monster made of wind and destruction. In an instant, fences were shredded, trees uprooted, and houses torn apart in the distance. The tornado was bearing down on the town, and it was moving fast. People were screaming. Clark's super hearing picked up the frantic voices of his neighbors, families desperately trying to get to shelter. He could hear car alarms blaring, wood splintering, and the awful sound of twisting metal as barns and houses were ripped apart. His heart pounded in his chest, but not from fear. He could save them. He knew he could. But then the voice of his father rang in his ears. "Clark! Come on!" Jonathan shouted, waving him toward the storm cellar, his face pale with fear. He didn't know that his son was capable of so much more than running to safety. He didn't know that Clark could stop it. For a split second, Clark stood frozen between two worlds, the one where he was just a quirkless farm boy, running to hide from the storm, and the one where he was Kal-El, an alien with the power to change the fate of everyone around him. "Dad, I can't," Clark started, his voice thick with the weight of his decision. "Clark, please." Martha's voice broke through the chaos. "We have to go." And then, in that moment, Clark made his choice. The tornado was too close now, and there was no more time to think. Clark sprinted into the open field, away from the house, away from his parents. Jonathan called after him, his voice full of panic, but Clark couldn't stop. He felt the wind tugging at his clothes, pulling at his hair, and with a single leap, he launched himself toward the heart of the storm. The tornado was unlike anything he had ever faced. Its winds whipped around him, a chaotic, swirling force of nature, tearing apart everything in its path. The debris was thick in the air. Splintered wood, fragments of metal, entire trees lifted from the ground and spun like matchsticks. Clark flew into the eye of the storm, his heart pounding with the enormity of what he was about to do. He reached out, feeling the pressure of the wind against his body, his senses alive with the sheer energy of the storm. He had never used his powers so openly, so recklessly, but there was no time for caution. The tornado was heading straight for the town center, and if it hit Smallville, it would flatten everything in its path. People would die. Clark pushed himself harder than he ever had before. Relying on his speed, he got the people out of the way of the raging tornado. The only thing the people of Smallville knew about that day was that they were saved by miracles. Either it was a gust of strong wind blowing them to safety or a piece of flying rubble miraculously avoiding them. They never saw the face of their hero. After Clark made sure everyone was safe, he flew into the swirling vortex, his body cutting through the wind like an arrow. He needed to weaken the tornado, slow it down, and make it tear itself apart from the inside. His hands moved in a blur as he created a counter-rotation, his superspeed spinning against the direction of the funnel. The winds resisted him at first, the sheer force of the storm pushing him back, but Clark gritted his teeth and pushed harder. His body was a blur of motion as he flew in circles around the tornado, faster and faster, until the winds began to lose their power. The roar of the storm became a low howl, the debris falling to the ground in a rain of destruction. Clark could feel the tornado weakening, its grip on the town loosening by the second as he kept flying in circles, never letting up. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, the tornado broke apart. The dark funnel lifted from the earth and vanished into the sky, leaving behind only the scattered remains of what it had destroyed. Clark hovered in the air for a moment, panting from the effort, his heart racing with the adrenaline of what he had just done. But as he looked down, he saw the destruction that the tornado had already caused. Smallville was in ruins. Houses were flattened, shops were damaged, trees were snapped in half, and fields were torn apart. And yet, as his eyes scanned the wreckage, he realized something miraculous: there were no casualties. Everyone had made it to safety in time. He had accounted for everyone. He had saved them all. But as Clark landed back on the ground, his heart sank. He looked at the wreckage of his town, the devastation left behind by the storm, and he knew that he could have done more. If he had acted sooner, if he hadn't hesitated to act, perhaps he could have saved his neighbors' livelihoods from this destruction. Jonathan and Martha found him moments later, their faces filled with relief and worry. Martha hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "You saved us, Clark," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You saved all of us." Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "But at what cost, son?" he asked quietly. "You took a big risk today, Clark." Clark nodded, his mind still swirling with the weight of what had just happened. For the first time in his life, he had used his powers for real. He had revealed a part of himself that he had spent years hiding, even if no one had seen him do it. The world still didn't know who he truly was, but today had been a reminder that his powers came with responsibility. He couldn't always help while hiding in the shadows. There would come a day when he would have to step into the light. A day when he would have to reveal the truth about himself to the world. As he looked around at the destruction left behind by the tornado, Clark realized that day was coming sooner than he had thought. That night, as the town of Smallville gathered together to begin rebuilding, Clark sat quietly with his parents, the weight of the day's events heavy on his shoulders. Jonathan and Martha didn't say much, but they didn't need to. They knew that their son's world was changing, and soon, the world would have to change with him. For Clark, the tornado wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a turning point. He had saved lives, but he had also seen the limits of his restraint. He could do so much more, and yet he had to hide, to hold back. The world wasn't ready for him yet, but the time would come. And when it did, he knew he would also have to be prepared for the world. The tornado left Smallville in ruins, but Clark couldn't stop thinking about how much worse it could have been. In the days following the disaster, he worked tirelessly alongside his neighbors to rebuild homes and clear debris, doing his best to blend in as the quirkless farm boy they knew. Yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't escape the weight of what had happened and what could have been. Late one evening, after another long day of helping the town recover, Clark sat alone in the barn. The sky was a deep indigo, stars beginning to twinkle in the wide Kansas sky. The air was still, a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm that had torn through the town just days before. Despite the quiet, Clark's mind was racing. He had saved Smallville. He knew that. The tornado had torn apart buildings, uprooted trees, and leveled fields, but there were no casualties. Every life in Smallville had been spared. Yet, as he replayed the events in his head, a single thought gnawed at him: I could have done more. Clark stared down at his hands, clenching them into fists. He had the power to stop the tornado before it ever reached the town, to shield his neighbors from the destruction. But instead, he had held back. For years, he had lived under the weight of his parents' warning that the world wasn't ready for him. They had raised him with love and care, teaching him to hide his true nature, to blend in, to avoid drawing attention. They had feared what might happen if people learned who he was and what he was. But Clark wasn't sure he could keep hiding anymore. The destruction in Smallville had been a reminder of the dangers his powers could avert. If he had embraced who he truly was, perhaps the town wouldn't have suffered at all. The thought twisted in his mind, growing heavier with each passing hour. As he sat in the barn, lost in thought, he heard the familiar creak of the door opening behind him. His mother, Martha, stepped in, her face soft with concern. She had always known when something was troubling him. She didn't say anything at first, sitting beside him on a wooden bench. The silence between them was comfortable, but Clark knew she was waiting for him to speak. "Mom," Clark began, his voice low, "I held back. I hid my presence from them. I could have stopped that tornado before it destroyed so much, but I didn't because I was scared. I was scared of what people would think, of what would happen if they found out what I could do." Martha listened, her expression calm and understanding. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Clark, your father and we've always known you were destined for more than this town. You've done incredible things, but you've also kept yourself hidden for so long. I understand why you feel this way." Clark looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I can't keep living like this, Mom. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I saw what that storm did, and it could have been so much worse. If I'm supposed to help people, I need to do it fully. Not halfway. Giving them all I've got." Martha nodded slowly, her eyes glistening in the soft light. She had always known this day would come, the day when her son would no longer be able to hide his true self. "Clark, your father and I wanted to protect you for as long as we could. This world, it's not always kind to those who are different. But I see now that you're ready. You've grown into a man who understands his role in this world. Maybe it's time the world knew the real you. Clark's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment he had feared and anticipated for so long. He had always thought that living as Clark Kent, the quirkless boy, was the only way to keep his family safe, to avoid the inevitable scrutiny that would come with revealing the truth. But now, sitting beside his mother in the quiet of the barn, he realized something profound: hiding was no longer an option. The world needed him, all of him. Not just Clark Kent, but Kal-El of Krypton. I don't even know where to start, Clark admitted, running a hand through his hair. How do I show people who I am? How do I explain that I'm not like them? That I'm an alien? Martha smiled gently, her eyes filled with pride and affection. You don't have to explain everything to them, Clark. You just have to show them who you are. Your heart, your kindness, your strength, those are what will make people trust you, not where you came from. She stood up then, walking over to an old trunk that sat in the corner of the barn. Clark watched as she carefully opened it, pulling out something that had been tucked away for years. When she turned around, she was holding a suit she had crafted with care, woven from durable, bright fabric. It was blue and red, with the symbol of the House of El emblazoned on the chest, an unmistakable S that symbolized hope. It took me a while to convince him, but your father let me make this for you, Martha said, her voice soft. I knew the day would come when you would need it. When the world would need you. Clark stood, his breath catching in his throat as he took the suit from her. The weight of it in his hands felt heavy with meaning, with destiny. He had seen the symbol before, in the recordings from the ship that had brought him to Earth. It was a symbol of his heritage, of his birthright as Kal-El of Krypton. It's time, Martha said, her voice filled with both strength and tenderness. Whatever name you choose, whatever you decide to become out there, just know that you'll always be my son. Whether you're Clark Kent or Kal-El, you're still the boy we raised. You're still the man who loves this town, who would do anything to protect it. Clark's throat tightened with emotion as he looked at his mother. He understood now. He didn't have to choose between being Clark Kent and Kal-El. He could be both. The world would see him as Kal-El, the new hero, but Clark Kent would always belong to Smallville, to the people who raised him, to the identity he had forged on Earth since the day he first arrived. I'll do it, Clark said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. I'll be the man I was meant to be. But I won't stop being your son. Martha smiled through her tears, reaching up to cup his face. I never doubted that for a second. Where's Pa? Clark's eyes darted around to find his dad. Oh, you know where he'll be, Clark, Martha said as she tidied Clark's suit. Go show him. Clark smiled at his mother before he went out of the house to find his father at a place he would always frequent, especially during the time of day. It was close to sunset. Jonathan Kent was standing on a hill just a few steps away from their house. He would always stand there to admire the view. To gaze upon the last golden glow before the dark curtain of night finally fell upon it. The old man then looked away from the sunset at the sound of cloth fluttering in the wind. He turned around, only to see his son wearing the suit Martha had made for their boy. He knew that Martha had always known that Clark would want to be a hero someday. Because that's just who he was. Jonathan wiped a few tears from his eyes. You've grown up, Clark. I'm still the same, Dad. I'm still your son. Those words reassured Jonathan Kent that the boy he had raised was still in there. I've always wanted to help everyone. As a hero, I can save everyone. I know, son. I know. But you should know that you may be powerful, but you can't possibly save everyone, Clark. Jonathan's words caused Clark to feel a pang in his chest. But I know that you can and will try. Yes, Dad. Clark nodded in agreement at his father's words. And Clark, you know what I said, Jonathan said. I know, Dad. Clark could remember his father's reminder by heart. The world is not ready for, I would like to change my words, Clark. Clark was genuinely surprised by the sudden interruption. The world may not be ready for all of you. At least, not everything about you. But the world is always ready for a new, powerful hero. One who will never hesitate to help those in need, just like what you have done here, Clark, ever since you know what you can do. That's what the symbol on your chest meant on Krypton, Clark. A symbol of hope. Clark never knew what the S symbol on his chest meant. Until Jonathan told him on that hill. Whatever you do, wherever you go, I'm proud of you, Clark. Remember that, son. Jonathan put a hand on the symbol on his chest, knowing just what his son would do. Thank you, Dad. Clark held his father's shoulder as he watched the sunset with him. They stayed there, on the hill, until the sky went dark. Martha watched from her seat on the porch with tears in her eyes, until her boys came home. As Clark entered the house, still in his colorful costume, Jonathan and Martha gave each other an understanding look. They knew that it was time for them to say goodbye to him as they would let him out into the world. The world may not be ready for everything about him, but the world is always ready for a new, powerful hero. They always do. But, still, he must be ready for the world. He must adapt to whatever comes next. The next day, Clark stood on a hill overlooking Smallville, wearing the suit. The wind whipped through the fields, carrying with it the echoes of the past and the weight of the future. He could feel the power within him, a force greater than any storm, greater than anything he had ever faced. For the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace it fully. With a deep breath, Clark took to the sky, flying higher and faster than he ever had before. He soared above the clouds, feeling the weight of the world below him, knowing that he could make a difference. Not just here in Smallville, but across the globe. From that moment on, he would no longer hide in the shadows. The world would know him as Kal-El, the hero from Krypton. He would be a symbol of hope, of strength, of the belief that one man could make a difference. He would become Superman. And as he flew through the sky, Clark Kent, the farm boy from Smallville, smiled under the sun. Because now, at last, he was free. But the moment when the world first needed him had come sooner than Clark had expected. He had only just begun to embrace the mantle of Kal-El of Krypton when the world moved its first great challenge at him. Days after the tornado in Smallville, Clark found himself drawn into an event that would forever change the way the world saw him, marking the true debut of Superman. On that day, Clark had flown out of Smallville in the early morning, testing the limits of his newfound freedom in the skies. No longer hiding, he wanted to feel the exhilaration of flight, the wind rushing past his face, the horizon opening before him. The suit his mother had crafted for him was bold and blue, with the red cape fluttering behind him. The suit felt like a second skin, a declaration to the world that he was ready to step out of the shadows as Kal-El of Krypton. As he soared above the heart of America, something caught his attention, a thick plume of smoke rising on the horizon, too wide and dark to be an ordinary fire. He adjusted his flight path, zeroing in on the source. What he found left him stunned. A high-speed passenger train was careening off its tracks at the edge of a cliffside, only moments away from plunging into the ravine below. The train had collided with something on the tracks, and its cars were tumbling one after another in a violent chain reaction. The screech of metal against metal was deafening even from the sky. Dozens of passengers were trapped inside, their screams lost in the chaos as the train swayed, teetering on the precipice of disaster. Without hesitation, Clark dove toward the wreckage. The scene below was one of pure panic. Helicopters hovered overhead, unable to approach, while emergency vehicles scrambled along the narrow roads leading to the crash site. Rescue workers stood helplessly at the edge of the ravine, knowing they would be too late to stop the train's fall. But Superman would not be too late. In a blur of blue and red, Clark streaked toward the train, his mind racing as he calculated the best way to intervene. The first car had already begun to tip, and he knew if one car went down, the rest would follow in a deadly cascade. He only had seconds to act. Flying faster than he ever had before, Clark positioned himself beneath the front car, his hands pressing into the metal chassis with incredible force. For a brief moment, the weight of the entire train seemed impossible, the strain rippling through his muscles. But then, with a surge of power, he pushed back against the momentum, stabilizing the front of the train just as the rest of it began to tip. The sight was unbelievable. A man, no something more than a man, was holding up an entire passenger train, defying the laws of physics. His cape billowed around him as he dug his heels into the ground, creating deep trenches in the earth below. Slowly, methodically, he began to lift the front car back onto the tracks, his body acting as a fulcrum as he pulled the rest of the train with it. Passengers inside stared in awe, their faces pressed against the windows, unable to comprehend what was happening. Who was this figure? Was he a pro-hero? Was this some new, powerful quirk? Just like All Might's amazing powers. The murmurs of disbelief rippled through the train as Clark, his face calm and focused, gently placed the train back onto the tracks. But it wasn't over. A second disaster loomed. Behind the train, a bridge that had been part of the railway was crumbling under the strain of the collision. Clark could hear the unmistakable groan of steel, the telltale crack of supports giving way. The bridge wouldn't hold for long. With one final push, Clark secured the train, ensuring that it would remain stable. Then, without pausing, he shot into the air, flying to the base of the bridge. His eyes glowed briefly with a soft crimson light as he used his heat vision to weld the fractured supports, stabilizing the structure before it could collapse entirely. In less than a minute, the entire catastrophe had been averted. Clark hovered in the air for a moment, taking in the scene below. The once chaotic scene had fallen silent, the emergency crews frozen in disbelief, their radios crackling with astonished voices. The passengers, many of whom had been bracing for death only moments earlier, now looked up at him in awe. They had no idea who their hero was. This figure in blue had appeared from nowhere and saved them all. But they knew one thing: he was unlike anything they had ever seen. Superman floated down to the ground, his red cape billowing as he landed lightly beside the wreckage. He glanced at the emergency responders, his calm demeanor belying the monumental feat he had just performed. "Everyone's safe now," Clark said, his voice steady but warm. "Help is on the way." The stunned silence persisted for a few seconds longer before one of the reporters on the scene broke it. "Who are you?" she shouted, shoving a microphone toward him. "Are you a pro-hero? What's your quirk?" Clark hesitated for a brief moment, realizing that this would be the moment, the one moment he couldn't turn back from. He wasn't just Clark Kent anymore, and he wasn't going to hide who he was. But this wasn't the time for an interview. His identity could wait. Right now, people need reassurance. "I'm here to help," he said, his tone calm and certain. "That's all that matters." And before anyone could press him further, Clark took off into the sky, disappearing into the clouds as quickly as he had appeared. Clark didn't stay to witness the aftermath, but the world was already buzzing with the news of what had just happened. By the time he returned to Smallville, the footage of the event was spreading across every news network and every social media platform. People everywhere were asking the same question: who was the mysterious hero in the blue suit? Speculation ran rampant. Some thought he was a new pro-hero, someone born with multiple quirks that gave him both superhuman strength and flight. Others wondered if he was some kind of experiment, a government secret finally revealed. But Clark and his parents knew that the truth was even stranger. News outlets replayed the footage of the rescue over and over again, analyzing every second. Reporters struggled to explain how one man had saved an entire train from plunging into a ravine, how he had repaired a collapsing bridge in mere moments. People across the country, and soon, across the world, began to call him Superman, a name that had first appeared in a headline describing the heroic rescue. They remembered seeing the giant S symbol on his chest and their minds filled the rest. There were other names for him, like Supreme, Superior, or Samaritan. But the name Superman was the most popular of them all. The name eventually stuck. The Hero Public Safety Commission couldn't ignore the event. A figure with that much power, who had saved so many lives, but who was completely unregistered. This was unprecedented. Calls began flooding into the Commission's offices, and soon, they reached out to Superman himself. It was time for answers. Clark had only just begun to settle back into his routine in Smallville when the public invitation was uploaded to the internet. Makoto Tsukachi, a renowned pro-hero investigator with the quirk that could detect lies, wrote the invitation to interview him. The Commission assigned her for the job. They wanted to know who this Superman was and what his intentions were. Of course, it was a public invitation, uploaded on the internet, visible to everyone on Earth. The Commission did so because it was the only way for it to reach Superman, and they knew it would be extremely impolite for him to decline it with the whole world knowing about it. How would they know if Superman declined the interview? Simple. If Superman did not arrive at the interview, it would be met with suspicion, if not outright vilification, from the world at large. Why is he hiding? Did he have something to hide? His absence from the interview would certainly raise more questions like that. Clark knew it was inevitable. The world had seen him now, and the questions would only grow. But he was ready. He had decided long ago that he would no longer hide. He would reveal himself to be Kal-El of Krypton to the rest of the world, with a hero name of his own, just like all the pro-heroes out there. That was Superman. But the identity of Clark Kent, the quirkless young man, would remain a secret. A secret identity. It would certainly raise questions if the quirkless Clark Kent suddenly revealed himself as an alien. And he wanted a part of himself to stay grounded. To be human. Down to earth. That part was Clark. He told his parents about his plans beforehand, and they supported him wholeheartedly. As the sun set over the familiar Kansas fields, Clark looked out over the horizon, knowing that the next chapter of his life was about to begin. He had saved lives today, but this was only the beginning. The world had finally seen Superman, and they would never forget about it anytime soon. The buzz around Superman's first public act of heroism had reached a fever pitch. The train rescue had been broadcast across the world, with clips of him flying, lifting train cars, and stabilizing the collapsing bridge played on every news channel. Speculation was rampant. Who was this figure in blue and red, this man who moved with the power of all might and spoke with the humility of a neighbor? The world wanted answers, and they weren't willing to wait. Makoto Tsukachi, a respected investigator for the Hero Public Safety Commission, had been chosen to lead the inquiry. Her reputation was impeccable. She had solved countless cases, her quirk, polygraph, allowed her to detect lies with absolute certainty. In a world where pro-heroes often hid behind facades or public personas, Makoto's quirk enabled her to cut through the noise, ensuring that the truth was always revealed to HR. If there was anyone fit to uncover the mystery of Superman, it was her. The interview was set for a public forum, a venue large enough to accommodate journalists, members of the commission, and curious onlookers who wanted to witness this monumental moment. Clark knew the attention this would bring, but he also knew it was necessary. If he was going to help this world, he needed to be transparent. People needed to trust him. The hall was buzzing with anticipation as Clark entered, dressed in the suit his mother had made. The S on his chest gleamed, and his cape rippled slightly as he walked toward the podium. The room quieted almost immediately at the sight of him. Here was the man who had performed the impossible, standing before them with the poise and presence of a true hero. He then sat on the chair placed right on the stage. Makoto Tsukachi sat beside him, her posture relaxed but her gaze focused. She had seen many heroes come and go, but none quite like this. She had heard the stories about how he had flown faster than the speed of sound, how he had lifted a train with his bare hands, and how he had saved countless lives without asking for anything in return. Now it was time to hear from the man himself. The cameras flashed as Makoto began her interview, her voice calm and measured. The world has witnessed your actions, Superman. You saved countless lives and performed feats that most people believed were impossible. But we don't know who you are. What can you tell us about yourself? Clark raised the microphone, his voice steady but warm. It was time for them to know who he was. Makoto put a hand on his shoulder for her quirk to work on him. "My name is Kal-El," he began, the name still feeling new on his lips. "Yet right. I'm not from this world. I come from a planet called Krypton, which was destroyed a long time ago. I was sent to Earth as a child to survive, and this planet has been my home ever since." The room fell silent. The weight of his words settled over the audience. He had just confirmed what many had speculated. He wasn't human. He wasn't even from this world. He was an alien, living among them, with powers beyond comprehension. Makoto didn't flinch. She had expected something extraordinary from the new hero, and her quirk assured her that every word he spoke was the truth. "Why now?" she asked, her voice softer. "Why reveal yourself to the world today? What motivated you to step forward?" Clark's gaze swept over the crowd, his thoughts briefly flickering to the tornado in Smallville and the lives he had saved, but also the destruction he hadn't been able to prevent. "For years, I've tried to live a quiet life, to blend in with the people around me. I didn't want to cause fear or confusion. But then, the moment came when I realized that I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. If I have the power to help people and save lives, then I have a responsibility to do so. That's why I decided to act." He hid the details of the Smallville tornado. It was still considered recent. He didn't want to reveal that information to the world, which could help them track him down to Smallville and eventually find out his secret identity. After all, there weren't many people with the same height and build as Superman in Smallville. The only one who would match was Clark Kent. But it's still good enough to pass as the truth for the lady with the polygraph quirk. Technically, he didn't lie. He withheld just enough information to pass. Makoto nodded, her expression thoughtful. Even after she removed her hand from him and resumed the interview as just a simple conversation with the hero, she could still sense the sincerity behind his words. There was no arrogance, no hidden agenda. He wasn't seeking fame or glory. He was simply trying to make the world a better place. "And what about your abilities?" she continued. "Are they a result of a quirk, or something else?" Clark shook his head. "I don't have a quirk. The powers I have are because of where I come from. It is part of my Kryptonian heritage. Under Earth's yellow sun, I'm able to do things that aren't possible for normal humans. Strength, flight, heat vision. These are all part of who I am." The crowd murmured, their curiosity piqued. No quirk. In a world where quirks defined so much of a person's identity and power, Clark was an anomaly. He was something entirely different. Makoto pressed on. "You've saved lives, Superman. But there's concern about the fact that you're not a registered pro-hero. According to the laws of America, using your abilities in public without a hero license makes you a vigilante. How do you respond to that?" Clark had expected this question. He knew that despite his good intentions, there were rules in place for a reason. "I understand the importance of those laws," he said, his voice steady. "But I couldn't stand by and watch people die. I'm willing to go through the process of obtaining a hero license, to work within the system. But I couldn't wait for that to happen before acting. Too many lives were at stake." Makoto's eyes flickered with something like approval. Her quirk confirmed what she had suspected all along. Superman wasn't hiding anything. He wasn't lying, nor was he evading the truth. He genuinely believed in what he was doing. She leaned back slightly, her gaze softening. "And what should the world call you? You've introduced yourself as Kal-El, but the public needs to know what to call their new hero." Clark smiled, the name that had started to spread across the headlines now feeling like the right choice. "You can call me Superman." The room erupted in whispers and flashes of cameras. Superman. A name that had already begun to take root in the hearts of the people. It was simple, yet powerful, capturing the essence of everything he stood for. Superman. Is that why you have the S on your chest? Makoto pointed at Superman's chest insignia. Not exactly. This is the House of L's family crest. My family crest. It may look like an S, but it is a symbol of hope back at my world. He explained as he touched the striking insignia on his chest. A symbol of hope. Makoto stood beside him, her quirk had confirmed what the world had just heard. Superman was real. He was honest. And he was here to help. Turning back to the crowd, Makoto addressed the audience, her voice calm and clear. You've heard it directly from him. Superman is here to protect us, and from everything I've seen, he's telling the truth. The room erupted into cheers and applause. Reporters shouted questions, but Superman simply raised a hand, signaling that he had said all he needed to for now. As Clark stood up from his chair and stepped away from the podium, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The truth was out there now. The world knew who he was, or at least, the part of him he wanted them to see. His human identity as Clark Kent remained a secret, but his role as Kal-El of Krypton and Superman was now in full view. Makoto approached him as the crowd continued to buzz. Thank you for your honesty, Superman, she said, a small smile on her face. The world needs more heroes like you. Clark smiled back, grateful for her understanding. I'm just doing what I can, he replied. And with that, Superman took to the skies once more, disappearing into the clouds as the world watched in awe. As she watched him fly in the air, she felt a bit of hot wind blowing her hair. It's going to be a burning summer. Superman plus My Hero Academia crossover spring had passed. Summer had arrived. Under the blazing sun, Superman tried to fit into two roles, Clark Kent and Kal-El of Krypton. As Clark Kent transitioned into his new life, fully embracing his identity as Superman, there was still one crucial aspect of his dual life that he needed to MSTR, blending in as Clark Kent. To live the life of a hero while keeping his origins and extraordinary abilities a secret, Clark needed to maintain the balance between his two identities. And it was his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, who took it upon themselves to help their son perfect this vital disguise. One evening, shortly after Clark decided to don the mantle of Superman, the family gathered in the Kent farmhouse. The warm light of the living room lamp flickered softly as Clark sat with his parents, the gravity of the moment hanging in the air. Clark was no longer the young boy running through the Kansas fields. He was now a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. But he was also their son, and they would do everything they could to protect him. You need to understand something, Clark, Jonathan said, his voice steady and calm. The world may be ready for you now, but it isn't ready to know everything about you. Kal-El of Krypton can be out there saving people, inspiring them as Superman, but Clark Kent needs to stay grounded and anonymous. That's the only way to keep yourself and everyone around you safe. Martha, seated beside her husband, nodded in agreement. The trick isn't just hiding your powers, son. It's hiding who you are. You've lived your whole life being careful, but now that people know Superman, you need to create a real distance between him and Clark Kent. The last thing we need is someone putting two and two together. Clark listened intently, knowing that his parents had always guided him wisely. They had been preparing him for this for years, though now it was more real than ever. Martha, always the practical one, leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Clark, the key to your disguise isn't just wearing glasses or slouching. It's about becoming someone completely different. Superman is confident, powerful, and larger than life. Clark Kent, on the other hand, is shy and quiet and easily blends into the background. People need to see you as two entirely separate people. Jonathan nodded in agreement. You've got to think about the details. Think about how you walk, talk, and carry yourself. Superman stands tall and commands attention. But Clark, he's more reserved, always looking like he's in the background. Don't let people take a second look. That's how you protect yourself. They decided to start practicing right then and there. Let's start with the glasses, Martha suggested, handing Clark a pair of simple, modest-looking frames. They weren't flashy or expensive. They were just a pair of everyday glasses that would help obscure his identity. Put these on. Clark slid the glasses on, the metal cold against his face. He looked in the mirror, and to his surprise, he already felt a difference. The glasses, combined with a slight change in posture, made him seem less imposing, less like the powerful figure of Superman. Jonathan studied him for a moment and then said, "Try slouching a bit more. You've got to make yourself smaller, less noticeable. And when you talk, soften your voice. People are used to hearing Superman speak with authority, but Clark needs to be someone who's not trying to be heard." Clark nodded, adjusting his stance. He loosened his posture, rounded his shoulders slightly, and let his voice drop a bit in volume, with a little rise in pitch when he spoke. "Like this?" he asked, his tone more subdued. Martha smiled, her eyes warm with pride. "That's good, Clark. You're already starting to look like someone else. And remember, Clark Kent is the one people see every day. He's the guy who goes to work, buys groceries with paper bags instead of plastic and helps out in the community. Superman is the one they see when the world needs saving." Jonathan added, "It's about more than just the glasses and posture, though. You've got to think about how Clark moves in the world. When Superman's on the scene, everyone looks up to him. But Clark needs to be invisible, always one step behind the crowd. You've got to practice not drawing attention, blending in." They spent the evening walking Clark through different scenarios. Teaching him how to interact with people like Clark, how to downplay his natural abilities, and how to make sure no one connected the quiet, mild-mannered reporter to the towering figure who could fly. Jonathan even gave him tips on being more awkward, intentionally fumbling with things, or being unsure in conversations, traits that would help build the illusion that Clark was an entirely different person from Superman. Martha, always the keen observer, gave Clark some final advice. "Remember, sweetheart, it's not just the physical part of the disguise, it's your mindset, too. When you're Clark Kent, you've got to believe it. You've got to think like Clark. He's not invincible. He's just a regular guy trying to get through the day like everyone else. If you can make people believe that, then they'll never question who Superman is." Clark stood in front of the mirror, glasses on, posture slouched, and with a softer look in his eyes. He practiced walking around the room, adjusting his body language to look less confident, and more self-conscious. He could see the difference, and so could his parents. "You've got this, Clark," Jonathan said, his voice full of pride. "You'll make them believe. You always have." As the night wore on, Clark felt a renewed sense of purpose. The disguise wasn't just about hiding, it was about protecting the people he loved and ensuring that the world would never link Clark Kent, the humble reporter, to Superman, the symbol of hope. But then, the day came for Superman's world to change. The summer sun was blazing down on the world when Superman was flying his regular patrol, scanning the vast horizon for any signs of trouble. He had been working tirelessly since his debut, helping people in small, but significant ways. But nothing could have prepared him for the chilling news that came through the military frequencies that day. "Nuclear missile launch detected." The words hit like a hammer. Superman's superhearing caught the panic transmission from AU's Military Command Center. A nuclear missile had been launched, and it was heading straight toward a major city on the East Coast. The military was scrambling, but no conventional defense system could react in time. The missile was already in the air. Without hesitation, Superman soared toward the missile's projected trajectory, pushing himself to near his maximum speed. The situation's urgency propelled him forward. Millions of lives were at stake, and there was no room for error. His mind raced as he calculated the missile's velocity, the trajectory, and how much time he had left. He found the missile strkng across the sky, leaving a trail of exhaust in its wake. It was massive, carrying the destructive power to annihilate millions. Superman's heart pounded. He couldn't destroy it outright with his heat vision or by simply crashing right into it. Detonating the missile in the lower atmosphere would risk spreading radioactive fallout in the clouds, which would inevitably fall onto the ground, affecting everyone below. And detonating it in the upper atmosphere would risk creating an electromagnetic pulse big enough to disable electronics in the entire East Coast. He knew he had to divert the missile. And he knew just where to put it. Space. He caught up to the missile, flying alongside it. Superman reached out, grabbing hold of the missile's nose. The sheer force of its propulsion sent tremors through his body, but his resolve was unshakable. Muscles tensed, eyes narrowed, and with a mighty exertion, Superman began to redirect the missile's course. He tilted it upward, steering it away from the Earth's surface. The ground below became a blur as the missile climbed higher and higher, breaking through the clouds and hurtling toward the upper atmosphere. Superman's cape whipped wildly in the wind, his entire body straining against the overwhelming force of the missile's engine. But inch by inch, he forced it higher and faster, propelling it beyond the planet's atmosphere. The sky darkened as they breached the stratosphere. The air thinned, and soon the missile entered the cold, airless void of space. Once there, Superman gave one final push, sending the missile hurtling into the far reaches of space, far beyond Earth's orbit. It drifted harmlessly into the endless abyss, never to threaten life on Earth again. Superman lingered for a moment in space, gazing at the now distant missile, feeling the weight of what had just been prevented. The Earth below looked so fragile from up here, a appealing, delicate world that could have been shattered in an instant. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, but there was still more to do. Superman's X-ray vision kicked in as he scanned the vast ocean below. His keen eyes traced the missile's launch trajectory, pinpointing its source, a stealth submarine, hidden deep beneath the surface. It was clear now. This was no accident. Someone had launched the missile deliberately, and they were still out there, lurking beneath the waves. Without wasting another second, Superman shot back toward Earth, cutting through the atmosphere at incredible speed. He dived into the ocean with a barely noticeable splash, descending into the inky depths. The submarine was massive, its black hull designed to evade detection, but Superman's senses were far sharper than any military radar. He swam up to the submarine, his eyes glowing with determination. With a single, powerful motion, he grabbed hold of the submarine's hull and began to push upwards. The vessel groaned under his strength as he lifted it out of the ocean, the crew inside thrown into chaos as alarms blared. They had never expected to see a lone man hauling their nuclear submarine out of the sea. Superman carried the massive submarine into the sky, flying it toward the nearest military base. The vessel's weight was insignificant to him, though its presence was monumental. As he approached the base, the personnel on the ground were left speechless, staring up at the sight of Superman, the living legend, carrying a nuclear submarine as though it were no more than a cargo crate. With a gentle motion, Superman set the submarine down on the tarmac, the sound of its metal hull reverberating across the airfield. Soldiers and officers quickly swarmed the scene, weapons drawn, unsure whether to react with awe or alarm. Superman didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the crew inside, waiting for the soldiers to arrest them. Within minutes, the submarine's occupants were being dragged out in HNDCFFS, their plans thwarted, their faces pale with disbelief. They had unleashed a nuclear missile on the world, but they hadn't counted on Superman. The base commander approached Superman with awe in his eyes, barely able to believe what had just unfolded. "Superman," he said, his voice shaking with gratitude. "You just stopped a nuclear disaster. You saved millions of lives. Thank you." Superman gave a humble nod. "That's my duty," he replied simply. He wasn't looking for thanks. He had done what needed to be done. But he knew now that his actions had propelled him further into the public eye. After Superman's extraordinary act of heroism of stopping a nuclear missile and delivering a stealth submarine to a military base, his legend had grown. His actions had saved millions of lives and averted a disaster of unimaginable scale. But in the eyes of the pro-hero community, there were still questions that needed answers. Operating without a hero license would put him in a gray area, one that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. That was the reason why Star and Stripe, America's #1 pro-hero, requested a private meeting with him. Unlike the invitation to the interview in spring, the invitation was sent through military channels instead of the internet. She had watched him from afar, impressed with his abilities, but as a veteran of the pro-hero world, she knew that power alone wasn't enough. He needed to be brought into the fold, to understand the responsibilities, laws, and structure that govern heroism in this world. They met on a deserted military airfield at dusk, the sky painted in hues of orange and red. Superman stood calmly, his iconic suit gleaming in the waning light, while Star and Stripe approached with her confident stride. She was a figure of awe. Her patriotic uniform and sheer presence commanded respect. She had been through battles that would test even the toughest heroes, and her reputation was untouchable. For a moment, they stood in silence, the wind rustling faintly around them. Then, Star and Stripe spoke, her voice steady but carrying the weight of her years of experience. "Superman," she began, her tone direct but not unkind. "You've been making waves. After the heroics you've done for these past few months, saving the falling train and stopping the nuclear missile, people are calling you a symbol of hope, just like you said in the interview in spring. And they're right. But there's something you need to understand." Superman listened intently. He respected her as a hero, and he knew this meeting was important. She wasn't just here to congratulate him. "You're walking a dangerous line," she continued. "You're acting as a hero, but you're not a part of the system. That missile stunt. It saved millions of lives, but legally, you were still a vigilante. If you had made one wrong move, if that missile had detonated, or if the sub-crew had fought back, there'd be chaos. And as much as people love you now, that kind of mistake could turn public opinion in an instant." Superman's jaw tightened, but he remained calm. He knew there was truth to her words. While he'd done what he felt was right, he was also aware that he was operating outside the law, and that created complications. "I'm not here to lecture you," Star and Stripe said, her tone softening slightly. "I'm here because I see what you're trying to do. You want to help. You want to protect people. And you've got the power to do that. But power without structure, without accountability, can lead to chaos." She stepped closer, her intense gaze meeting his. "Look, I didn't get to where I am by flying solo. Being a hero isn't just about power or saving the day. It's about responsibility, about working within a system that helps us do the right thing. It's about making sure the people trust us and that they know we're held accountable, just like anyone else in this world. You can't be a hero if you're always one step away from being labeled a threat." Superman absorbed her words, his mind racing with the implications. He had always acted on instinct, doing what he believed was right. But she was right. The world had rules, and even someone like him couldn't ignore them forever. Star and Stripe crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful. "I've seen what you can do. You've got the potential to be one of the greatest heroes this world has ever seen. But if you want to keep doing this, if you want to protect the people, you need to be part of the system." She paused, letting her words sink in. "That's why I'm offering you training. It won't be just to hone your skills, but to show you what it means to be a pro-hero. To teach you how to navigate the rules, the regulations, and the responsibilities. This isn't just about being strong. It's about understanding the world you're protecting." Superman stood silently for a moment, considering her offer. He knew she was right. The days of operating in the shadows were over. His actions had drawn the attention of the world, and with that came the need for structure and legitimacy. "I'm willing to learn," Superman finally said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "I know I've been acting outside the system, and I don't want to cause more harm than good. If training will help me become the hero I need to be, then I'll do it." Star and Stripe's expression softened into a smile, one of approval and relief. "Good. That's what I wanted to hear. You've already proven you've got the heart of a hero, but now it's time to prove that you can be a part of something bigger. You'll be working with the best, and we'll push you hard. But by the end of it, you'll be ready to take your place among the pro heroes. Superman extended his hand, and Star and Stripe shook it firmly. At that moment, there was a shared understanding and a sense of respect between two people who understood what it meant to protect the world. Just know this, Superman, Star and Stripe said as she released his hand. This training won't be easy. You may be strong, but there's a lot you still need to learn about being a hero in this world. You'll be tested, physically and mentally. But I believe in you. If anyone can do this, it's you. Superman nodded, feeling the weight of her words but also a renewed sense of purpose. He had been fighting to protect people his whole life, but now, with Star and Stripe's guidance, he could truly understand what it meant to be a hero in this world. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was about to step into the realm of pro-heroes, where power came with responsibility, and where every action mattered. All that was left was to tell the world, showing the world that he meant it. The moment Star and Stripe stepped up to the podium, the nation's eyes were fixed on her. The backdrop was a large, official government base where she often conducted military-based hero operations. A crowd of reporters, officials, and even a few curious civilians stood at attention, eager to hear the announcement that had been teased for days. Speculation had run wild ever since Superman had made his dramatic appearance, stopping a nuclear missile and bringing the submarine responsible into custody. Now, everyone wanted to know the fate of this new vigilante hero. Superman stood beside Star and Stripe on the platform, his iconic suit shining under the sunlight. He had already captured the public's imagination since his interview with Makoto Tsukachi. He was a figure straight out of myth. Yet here he was, standing tall, while the world watched. Star and Stripe took a deep breath, her steely blue eyes scanning the crowd before she began to speak. "Thank you all for coming," she started, her voice powerful and authoritative. "In recent days, we've all witnessed the actions of a hero who has yet to step fully into the light. Superman, as he's come to be known, has shown incredible dedication to saving lives, including preventing a disaster of catastrophic proportions. His actions have been nothing short of remarkable." A murmur spread through the crowd as cameras flashed, catching every word. The world was hanging on her every syllable. But, as we all know, even those with great power must be held accountable. No matter how noble it is, vigilantism is still outside the law's bounds. Our heroes must operate with clear guidelines and responsibility, with the proper training to ensure that their actions benefit society in every way. That's why today, I'm here to announce something unprecedented. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I, Star and Stripe, will personally be taking Superman under my wing. The crowd erupted in surprised chatter, but Star and Stripe raised a hand to silence them. He will undergo extensive training under my direct supervision until he has proven himself worthy of an official hero license. This will not be an easy road, but I believe he has the potential to become one of the greatest heroes this world has ever seen. And I intend to make sure he reaches that potential. Her words echoed with an unmistakable authority. Star and Stripe was known for her no-nonsense approach to heroism, often holding the highest standards for anyone she worked with. For her to take Superman under her wing was more than just an acknowledgement of his abilities. It was a statement to the world that she believed in him. The public might have viewed him as a vigilante, but in Star and Stripe's eyes, he was a hero in the making. Superman stood tall beside her, his expression serious but grateful. He didn't say much in that moment. His actions had already spoken volumes. The respect between them was clear. This was not just the start of a mentor-pupil relationship. It was the start of a partnership. Superman has already shown he has the strength and the heart of a true hero. But strength is not enough. A hero must be more than just power. He must understand responsibility, accountability, restraint, and strategy. That's what I intend to teach him. The cameras zoomed in as she stepped back slightly, nodding to Superman, who stepped forward to address the crowd. I've always believed that with great power comes an even greater responsibility to do what's right. And I've always wanted to help in any way I can. But she's right. I still have a lot to learn. I'm ready to prove that I can earn my place among the great heroes of the world. The sincerity in Superman's voice resonated with everyone listening. His words were humble, yet filled with determination. He didn't see himself as above the law or the system but as someone willing to go through the same trials and tests as any other hero in the world. He was ready to prove himself worthy of the title. Star and Stripe nodded approvingly, then turned back to the crowd. The process will be rigorous, and Superman will face challenges just like any other pro-hero candidate. When, and only when, I deem him ready, will he be given his hero license. Until then, he will train, fight, and learn under my command. She left no room for doubt in her voice. This was a firm decision, not open for debate or discussion. As the announcement came to a close, reporters fired off questions in rapid succession, eager to learn more about the arrangement, Superman's training, and how long it would take for him to achieve the same status as other licensed heroes. "How long do you think it will take for Superman to earn his hero license?" one reporter shouted. Star and Stripe crossed her arms, her expression serious. "That depends on him. But knowing what I've seen of him already, I do not doubt that he'll meet the challenge head-on." Another reporter directed a question to Superman. "Superman, why did you agree to this training? You've already saved countless lives, including preventing a nuclear disaster. Why do you need a license?" Superman responded, his tone thoughtful but resolute. "Because it's the right thing to do. No matter how powerful you are, you have to respect the law. Heroes need to be accountable, not just to the people they save, but to society as a whole. And I want to earn that responsibility the right way." With that, the press conference ended, leaving the public buzzing with excitement and curiosity. Star and Stripe's announcement had sent a powerful message. Superman wasn't just a powerful being, but one committed to learning, growing, and doing things the right way. And with her guiding him, the world began to truly believe that Superman could become not just a hero, but a symbol of hope and responsibility. From that moment on, the world kept a close eye on Superman's training under Star and Stripe, eagerly awaiting the day when he would officially step into the light as a fully licensed pro-hero. Superman's training under the legendary American pro-hero, Star and Stripe, was as grueling as it was enlightening. From the moment he accepted her offer, Clark knew this would be one of the most challenging experiences of his life. Not because of the physical demands, which he was well equipped for, but because it required him to adapt to a world that still didn't fully understand him. Star and Stripe, the indomitable symbol of American heroism, was a no-nonsense mentor. She was known for her military discipline, tactical prowess, and sheer force of will. Clark had seen her in action from afar, and now, standing in front of her as an apprentice, he understood why she commanded so much respect. "You're strong, Kal-El," she said during their first training session, her tone firm but not unkind. "But raw power isn't enough. Being a hero isn't just about stopping villains or saving lives. It's about knowing when to hold back and when to unleash everything you've got. You've got the strength, but we need to work on control." The training wasn't just about honing his physical abilities. It was about teaching Clark how to integrate his power into the framework of the world of heroes. Star and Stripe emphasized the importance of working within the system, obtaining a hero license, and understanding the laws that govern their world. She made it clear that, despite his good intentions, Superman was still seen as a vigilante by many, and the world needed more than just his strength. It needed his cooperation with the rules. The regimen she designed for him was rigorous. They trained in isolated military facilities, away from prying eyes, where Clark could push his abilities to their limits without risking collateral damage. Star and Stripe took him through a variety of combat scenarios like hand-to-hand combat, tactical drills, and situational hero work that required him to think on his feet. Clark's superhuman strength, speed, and senses were put to the test, but it was his mental and emotional resilience that Star and Stripe focused on most. She made sure he understood that being a pro-hero wasn't just about saving lives. It was about earning the public's trust and working with the system. "You can fly faster than a speeding bullet," she said, watching as he effortlessly lifted a military tank during one training session. "But if the public doesn't trust you, none of that will matter. Your power alone won't make you a hero. It's how you use it." They trained in extreme environments. From scorching deserts to freezing mountains. Testing Superman's limits. Star and Stripe knew Superman was invulnerable to most things, but she wanted to see how he would handle situations that weren't just about brute strength. She threw him into scenarios that required him to use his intellect and creativity, testing how he would save lives in situations where he couldn't just overpower the problem. There was one particular exercise where she had him simulate stopping a runaway train without damaging it. At first, Superman tried to simply stop it with brute force, but Star and Stripe reminded him that a real hero's job was to minimize damage while maximizing safety. He had to figure out how to slow the train gradually, avoiding injuries to passengers and preventing the train from derailing. It was a test of finesse and restraint, something he had rarely been required to practice before. Superman's most challenging moment came during a mid-training exercise that mirrored the unpredictable chaos of real-world disasters. He was tasked with stopping a catastrophic event. A plane plummeted from the sky, its engines dead, while a nearby bridge was collapsing. Superman's instinct was to fly to the plane, but Star and Stripe's voice echoed in his mind, "Think before you act. Prioritize. Control." He quickly assessed the situation, using his enhanced vision and hearing to calculate the best course of action. With remarkable speed, he secured the bridge first, using his strength to support the structure long enough for the trapped civilians to escape. Then, in a blur of motion, he soared into the sky, catching the plane just before it crashed. He gently lowered it into a nearby stadium, making sure the passengers were safe. As the holographic crowd around him erupted into cheers, Superman realized something important. This wasn't just about using his powers. It was about thinking like a hero. It was about seeing the bigger picture, understanding that sometimes the greatest strength was restraint, and knowing when to apply just enough power to resolve a crisis. Star and Stripe watched from afar, a proud yet measured expression on her face. She approached him after the exercise, her arms crossed. "You did well out there," she said, her voice gruff but sincere. "But don't let it go to your head. You're getting better, Kal-El, but there's still more to learn. Every situation is different, and no matter how strong you are, you have to be smarter than the problem. You're not just a symbol, you're a protector. Never forget that." Clark nodded, taking her words to heart. Star and Stripe had a way of cutting through the noise, grounding him in reality. She reminded him that being Superman wasn't just about flying around and saving the day. It was about earning the responsibility of being a pro-hero, about understanding the weight of his actions and how they affected the world around him. Despite the intensity of the training, Clark appreciated Star and Stripe's tough love approach. She pushed him harder than anyone ever had, but it was necessary. He wasn't just learning how to be stronger. He was also learning how to be a true hero, one who operated with wisdom and restraint. During breaks from training, Clark would reflect on the lessons she imparted. He realized that while his powers set him apart, it was his humanity that made him truly exceptional. His compassion, his longing to protect, and his willingness to learn. As the summer wore on, Clark's skills as Superman became sharper and more refined. He was no longer the uncertain vigilante who had saved Smallville from a tornado. He was evolving into the hero the world needed him to be. Star and Stripe had given him the tools, but it was Clark's heart and mind that would ultimately guide him in his journey to becoming not just a hero, but a symbol of hope. Between his training with Star and Stripe, Superman also carried the identity of Clark Kent with him at his other job. Clark Kent had arrived in Metropolis to start his new life as an ordinary journalist after months of training. His parents had spent weeks helping him perfect his disguise. The glasses, the slightly hunched posture, and the soft, unsure voice, all combined to create the unassuming image of a mild-mannered man who no one would ever suspect was the hero known as Superman. Martha and Jonathan had emphasized the importance of this dual identity, urging him to protect the life of Clark Kent just as much as the world needed Superman. There was one time that Jonathan joked that his son could win an Oscar for his convincing acting. The Daily Planet was everything Clark had imagined, a bustling, high-energy newsroom where stories were churned out by the minute. He had always admired journalists for their work in uncovering the truth, and now he was in the thick of it, under the sharp eye of editor Perry White. Clark was starting small, and that includes covering community events and human interest stories, and occasionally getting assignments on American pro-heroes coming to Metropolis. It was a new world, but one he was excited to explore. However, as fate would have it, Clark's new job brought him face to face with someone from his recent past. Someone who only knew him as Superman, Makoto Tsukachi. She had been his interviewer during his first public interview as Superman and had since followed his progress closely, especially after Star and Stripe had announced her decision to train him in the press conference. Now, as Clark Kent, he found himself in a unique position. He was meeting someone who knew Superman well but had no idea that the man standing in front of her was the same person. It was a new challenge for him. One afternoon, while Clark was still getting used to the Daily Planet's rhythm, he was sent to cover a press conference held by the Hero Public Safety Commission. It was a discussion about the evolving state of heroism in America, with a special focus on the impact of pro-heroes like Star and Stripe. As Clark approached the venue, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Makoto Tsukachi. She was standing in a small circle of other officials, deep in conversation, and for a moment, Clark hesitated. Would she recognize him? But he quickly reminded himself that his disguise was designed to be foolproof. To her, Clark Kent was just another reporter. As the press conference wrapped up, Clark caught up with her outside the building. "Miss Tsukachi, right?" Clark asked, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Clark Kent, Daily Planet. Mind if I ask you a few questions about the training Superman is undergoing with Star and Stripe?" Makoto turned, giving him a polite but scrutinizing glance. "Kent, was it?" "Sure, I've got a few minutes." Clark could feel the weight of her gaze as they walked to a quieter corner. Makoto had always been perceptive, and her ability to detect lies with her quirk made her an incredible investigator for the Hero Public Safety Commission. He had to tread carefully. While he wasn't lying as Clark, she might still pick up on any inconsistencies. "You've covered Superman a lot, right? What's your take on his training?" Clark asked, holding his notebook up like a shield. Makoto smiled slightly, not catching on to the irony. "It's unprecedented," she replied. "Superman's raw power is something the world hasn't seen before. His heart seems to be in the right place, but he's still a vigilante by legal standards. Befitting Star and Stripe's military background, it's safe to say that she is putting him through one of the toughest training regimes any hero has ever undergone. She's testing him not just for his abilities, but for his understanding of responsibility, strategy, and what it truly means to be a pro-hero." Clark nodded, taking notes, though he didn't need them. He knew the ins and outs of his training. Still, hearing it from Makoto's perspective felt surreal. He's doing well so far, though. The fact that she's training him shows how much potential she sees in him, Makoto added, glancing briefly at Clark's notebook. "You're interested in Superman, aren't you? I've noticed the Daily Planet has covered him quite a bit lately." Clark's heart skipped a beat. He kept his tone casual, trying to maintain the Clark Kent persona. "Yeah, he's a big story, especially after his heroics and the whole vigilante-turned-hero thing. People want to know if someone with his kind of power can handle the responsibility that comes with it." Makoto nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly, though not out of suspicion, but more from curiosity. "I agree. The world is watching him closely. But there's something different about Superman. He seems to have this weight on his shoulders like he's always carrying something more. Not just the expectations of the world, but something deeper." Clark felt a lump in his throat. She was right. Superman carried the weight of two worlds, Krypton and Earth, and the constant need to protect those he loved while hiding who he truly was. And not just from threats, but also from the noise of the world. He wanted his parents to live a peaceful life. Do you think he's up for it? Clark asked, hoping to steer the conversation away from anything too personal. Makoto paused, considering the question carefully. I think Superman will do what needs to be done. He's willing to learn, and that's a good sign. But I also think that even heroes need help sometimes. No one can do everything alone. Clark smiled softly at that, thinking of his parents and the many people who had helped him become the person he is today. As the conversation wrapped up, Clark thanked her and headed back to the Daily Planet to write his article. He couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. Makoto was speaking about Superman's journey and challenges, and yet she had no idea that Clark was living it firsthand. After the press conference, Clark found himself thinking more and more about what Makoto had said regarding Superman. Her keen observations and quiet insights stayed with him, and though their professional interaction had been brief, something in the way she spoke about Superman lingered in his mind. A few days later, they crossed paths again, this time in a less formal setting. Clark had decided to stop by a local cafe near the Daily Planet, hoping for a quiet moment to gather his thoughts and maybe put some finishing touches on his latest article. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and warm pastries greeted him, but so did an unexpected face. Makoto Tsukachi, seated at a small table near the window, sipping on tea. She hadn't noticed him yet, but he saw the exhaustion in her posture, the way her shoulders were slightly slumped as if carrying the weight of the day. Clark hesitated, but then something pulled him toward her. He knew their conversations about Superman had been mostly professional so far, but he was curious about her thoughts. Maybe it was time to move beyond the confines of interviews and press conferences. Gathering his courage, Clark approached her. Miss Tsukachi, he said, trying to keep his voice calm and casual, I didn't expect to see you here. Mind if I join you? Makoto looked up, her surprise quickly turning into a smile. Kent, right. Sure, have a seat. And please, call me Makoto. We're off the clock. Clark smiled and sat down across from her, adjusting his glasses. Off the clock, huh? That sounds nice. It's been a while since I've had a chance to relax. Makoto chuckled lightly, glancing out the window. Tell me about it. Life doesn't slow down, especially with all this focus on Superman lately. I guess that I'll have to stay in America for a while. Clark nodded. Yeah, he's keeping everyone on their toes. Speaking of which, how are you holding up? You've been working pretty closely on this whole Superman case. Makoto leaned back in her chair, a slight smirk on her lips. I guess you could say that. It's a lot, honestly. Superman's a unique case, unlike any hero we've ever dealt with. He's not just strong. He's well, different. Clark tilted his head, curious. Different how? Makoto paused, her eyes narrowing as she thought about her answer. It's hard to explain. There's something about Superman, beyond his powers, I mean. He has this sense of responsibility, like he's carrying more than just the burden of being a hero. There's something about him that feels isolated. Almost like he's separated from the rest of us. Clark felt a pang in his chest. She was right, of course. Superman was isolated, both as an alien from another planet and as someone who had to hide his true self from the world. But hearing her say it out loud made it feel all the more real. Do you think it's hard for him? Clark asked softly, his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. Being Superman, I mean. Living up to everyone's expectations. Makoto studied him for a moment as if weighing his words. I think it must be. People expect so much from him because of his powers, more so as everyone knows he's an alien. But they forget he's still well, human in a way. Even if he's not from Earth, he still feels things and struggles with things, just like anyone. And that kind of pressure. It has to get to him at some point. Clark swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. She didn't know the half of it. She didn't know how many times he had doubted himself, wondering if he could live up to the expectations placed on him as Superman. He knew that nothing would stop him from saving lives and helping everyone the best that he could, but still he's still human. Makoto took a sip of her tea, her gaze softening. What about you, Kent? You've been covering Superman a lot lately. What's your take on him? Do you think he's up to the challenge? Clark blinked, caught off guard by the question. He hadn't expected her to turn it on him so suddenly, but then again, Makoto was an investigator, she probably did this all the time. He leaned forward, thinking carefully about his words. He couldn't give away too much, but he also didn't want to lie. I think Superman he wants to help, Clark said slowly, choosing his words with care. I think he's doing the best he can. But I also think he feels alone. Even with everyone who looks up to him, it's hard to find someone who understands what he's going through. He's not like anyone on Earth. And with his powers, he probably feels like he has to be perfect all the time. Makoto's expression softened, and she nodded. Yeah, I get that feeling too. Like he's always carrying the weight of the world, literally and figuratively. Clark smiled faintly. I guess that's what happens when you're as powerful as Superman. But I think deep down, he just wants to make things better. He's probably scared of failing, like anyone else. Scared of not being good enough. Makoto was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching Clark's face as if trying to understand him better. You talk about Superman like you know him personally, she said, half joking, but with a hint of curiosity. Clark's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly chuckled, deflecting. I guess I've just read a lot about him. Hard not to when you're a reporter. After a long stretch of training and hero work over the past few months, Clark Kent finally found some time to return to Smallville. As much as he loved the excitement and challenge of his new life as Superman, and the sense of purpose it gave him, there was something irreplaceable about the tranquility of his childhood home. Smallville was where he could just be Clark, not a symbol or a hero. Just a son, coming back to visit his parents. The golden fields of wheat stretched out under the late afternoon sun as Clark walked up the familiar path to the Kent farmhouse. The scent of home cooking drifted through the air, and when he opened the door, there was Martha, just as she had always been, smiling, waiting for him with open arms. I was wondering when you'd make it back, Martha said, embracing him tightly. You're never too busy to come see your mother, are you? Never, Clark replied, smiling down at her. I've missed this place. It's still home. It always will be. After dinner, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of the farm and the gentle breeze blowing through the trees. For a while, they didn't speak, just enjoying the peacefulness that Smallville always seemed to offer. But eventually, Clark couldn't hold back the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for weeks. He turned to his mother, his voice thoughtful. Mom, do you think it's strange that no matter how much I do, or where I go, I still feel like this is the only place I belong? Martha turned to him, her face soft with understanding. No, it's not strange at all, sweetheart. Smallville's your home. It's where you grew up, where you learned who you are. It's only natural to feel that connection. But you know that things are changing, don't you? You're not just our Clark anymore. The world knows you now. As Superman. As Kal-El of Krypton. That's a big thing to carry. Clark sighed, his eyes distant as he stared out into the fields. I know. It's just everything's happening so fast. The training with Star and Stripe, the hero works I've been doing as Superman, and even my job as Clark Kent, the reporter. It's all new, and exciting, but exhausting. I love my work. I love what I do. I want to help everyone and save everyone the best that I can. But I can't shake the feeling that nothing will ever feel as real as this. Being home, with you and Dad. Martha listened quietly, her eyes soft as she looked at her son. She had always known this day would come. The day when Clark would be torn between the life he had grown up with and the life he was meant for. She knew it wouldn't be easy for him, no matter how strong he was. "I get it, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle but wise. "This farm, this town, and everything here has been your anchor for as long as you've known. But things change, Clark. They always do. It's part of growing up. As much as we'd all love for things to stay the same, they won't. It won't always be easy, and it definitely won't always be comfortable, but if there's anyone who can deal with change, it's you." Clark nodded, though the weight of her words sat heavily in his heart. "I don't want things to change here. You and Dad Smallville, I don't want any of it to change." Martha sighed softly, her hand gently patting his knee. "Your dad and I were getting older, Clark. I know you see it, even if you don't want to admit it. We've lived long, good lives, and we're so proud of you. But life keeps moving forward, and so do we. You can't stop it, no matter how much you want to." Clark lowered his head, the truth of her words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. Despite his incredible abilities, despite being Superman, the one thing he couldn't control was the passage of time. His parents were mortal, and the realization that they wouldn't always be there for him was one he had tried to avoid for as long as possible. Martha, always the one to lighten the mood, gave him a gentle nudge and smiled. "But I know you can deal with change, Clark. I just don't want you to walk through life alone after we've moved on with our lives. You can find someone you can trust to share your secrets with." "I know." After that, they sat in silence for a moment before Clark spoke again, this time with a more uncertain tone. "Speaking of which, there's something else I've been thinking about, Ma. It's complicated." Martha's brow furrowed slightly, but she waited patiently for him to continue. "It's about the people I've been working with. Star and Stripe, and someone else. Makoto Tsukachi." Martha smiled knowingly. "Ah, so you've been spending time with a certain lady, Clark's face flushed slightly. "It's not like that, well, not exactly. We've been talking a lot, and working together on some things. It started with interviews and official stuff. As a journalist, I worked with her a lot. But then we started talking more about personal things. She's smart and tough. I like her. But I don't know where it's going, or if it's even possible for me to, be in that kind of relationship. Not with everything I'm doing as Superman." Martha gave him a long look, then chuckled softly. "Clark, I've known you since you were in diapers. I can tell when someone's caught your eye. And it sounds like this Makoto woman has." Clark shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe. But it's not just her. There's also Kathleen." "Kathleen?" Martha was surprised at the mention of another woman. "Oh, Star and Stripe. Kathleen Bate. We've grown close too, during the training. She's been a great mentor, and she understands what it means to be a hero. We've become friends, and I respect her a lot. But I've been careful around her. And I've been careful not to tell either of them about who I am." Martha raised an eyebrow. "So, you're keeping secrets from both of them?" Clark ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "I have to, don't I?" Clark Kent was declared quirkless. "It was there in the official records, and they can't possibly be changed. And if people knew Superman was Clark Kent, it could put you and Dad in danger. Not just in danger from the villains, who are probably gunning for one of, if not, the most popular hero on the planet, especially as the world knows that Superman's an alien." Martha didn't fail to notice Clark being careful of his wording to describe himself. She knew her son was modest like that. "I also want to protect you and Dad from the noise of the world. If they came to you, it could complicate everything here. And I know that you and Dad hate the noise." Clark gestured to his mother and the farm around them. "The house, the fields, everything. I just want all of this to stay this way. Our fortress of solitude." Fortress of solitude. Martha couldn't help but chuckle a little at his choice of vocabulary. But it's getting harder, Ma. Hiding, I mean. With Makoto, we've talked so much about our personal lives, but there's always this part of me I have to keep hidden. And with Star and Stripe, even though she's training me, I feel like I'm holding back a part of myself. Martha squeezed his hand. Clark, I think you need to trust your instincts. You've always been good at knowing what's right. Maybe one day, you'll be able to tell them the truth. But for now, just be yourself. Even if that means keeping a part of you hidden. The people who care about you will understand, eventually. Clark nodded, but his mind was still full of conflicting thoughts. I just don't know what to do. I care about both of them but in different ways. And I can't help feeling like I'm being pulled in too many directions. Martha smiled gently. Well, maybe you need to let things play out naturally. Don't force it, don't rush it. You're still figuring out who you are as Superman and Clark. And maybe, just maybe, one of them will help you figure that out too. She paused, then added with a teasing grin, though I wouldn't mind having someone else to call family one day, Clark. You've got a good heart, and any woman would be lucky to share in that. Whether it's Makoto, or someone else entirely, just don't be afraid to let love into your life. You deserve it. Clark laughed softly. You're always looking out for me, aren't you, Mom? Always, she replied with a smile. Now, why don't you stay the night? Your father will be glad to see you when he gets back from town. As Clark sat back in the chair, listening to the sounds of the night settling in, he realized that despite everything going on in his life, Smallville would always be his anchor. His mother was right, things were changing, but that didn't mean he had to lose himself. He could still be Clark, even as the world knew him as Superman. And maybe, just maybe, he would find someone to share his secret identity with, even if it wasn't clear yet who that person might be. He just thought of his growing relationship with the two women in his life, and the secrets he had hidden from both of them. As the training with Star and Stripe continued through the summer, a bond that neither expected began to form between Superman and the legendary American pro-hero. At 24 years old, Superman was still learning to fully embrace his role as a hero, and Star and Stripe, at 42, a soldier and a seasoned veteran in the hero world, was not only his mentor but also someone who understood the tremendous burden of being a symbol of hope. From the start, their relationship had been professional. Star and Stripe was tough and direct and held Superman to incredibly high standards. She made it clear that no matter how strong he was, he still had much to learn about heroism, about control, and about navigating the complicated world of pro-heroes. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, their dynamic shifted. Superman, with his natural charm and genuine curiosity, found himself admiring Star and Stripe beyond just her immense power. She was someone who had lived through battles, both on the field and in the public eye, and yet remained unwavering in her dedication to justice. Despite her reputation as one of the most formidable heroes in the world, there was a warmth to her, a humanity that Superman found comforting. For Star and Stripe, Superman was a breath of fresh air. She had trained countless heroes over the years, but none like him. His raw power was astonishing, but what impressed her most was his heart. His longing to do good, his innate kindness, and his willingness to learn. Despite his godlike abilities, there was a humility about him that she rarely saw in others. He wasn't driven by ego or a need for glory. He genuinely wanted to help people, to protect them as best as he could. Some heroes trained with her just to feed their ego and glory even more, but others decided to stay soldiers as soon as they received their hero license from her. And, as she was a soldier herself, Kathleen knew that a soldier protects. But most of all, a soldier would kill to protect. She understood that. It was something she would do if, and only if, the situation calls for it. And she would know when the situation calls for it. She knew that the only thing stopping them from killing more villains was the risk of losing their hero licenses or getting arrested and jailed for it. To Star and Stripe, the last thing the world needed was a lethal protector. Killing villains without mercy. After grueling training sessions, they began to spend more time talking. At first, their conversations were still focused on their hero work between training, on strategies for dealing with villains, and on how to manage the pressures of public expectation. Star and Stripe would often tell him stories about her experiences as a pro-hero, giving Superman insights into the reality of the world he was now stepping into. Being a hero isn't just about saving the day, she'd say as they sat on the edge of a training field, the sun setting behind them. It's about how you carry yourself when things aren't going well. The way you keep going when the world's going against you, or when the public doubts you, or when you're faced with choices that have no easy answers. You have to be ready for all of that. Superman listened carefully, taking in every word. He admired how Star and Stripe carried the weight of her responsibilities, how she remained steady in the face of the pressure that came with being one of the world's most prominent heroes. He realized that being Superman meant more than just using his powers to help others. It meant becoming a symbol that people could trust and look up to, just as they looked up to her. As their bond grew over the months, the conversations between them became more personal. Star and Stripe started to open up about her life outside of being a hero, something she rarely did. She told Superman about the sacrifices she'd made, how her career had taken precedence over everything else. How she had never married and never had children, because the life of a hero, especially as the greatest heroine in the world, didn't leave room for those kinds of relationships. There was a wistfulness in her voice when she spoke of what could have been, but she quickly brushed it off, refocusing on the importance of the task at hand. Be a hero. And she loved being a hero. To save people and restore the smiles on their faces. Just like her idol, All Might. Superman, in turn, began to share pieces of his life. He talked about the simple, peaceful life he'd known before he revealed himself to the world. He told her about his upbringing, and about how his human parents had instilled in him the values of hard work, kindness, and responsibility. But even as they grew closer, he never revealed his secret, that he was living a double life as Clark Kent, or the identity of his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, or that they were living in Smallville. Star and Stripe could sense that there was something Superman wasn't telling her, but she respected his boundaries. She didn't press him for more than he was willing to share. Instead, she valued the friendship that was developing between them, appreciating the trust they had begun to build. She had never expected to find a kindred spirit in someone so much younger, but Superman's earnestness and sincerity disarmed her in a way that few others could. Their training sessions became more than just tests of strength and strategy. They became moments of connection. After hours spent battling simulated enemies and pushing their physical limits, they would sit together, talking late into the evening. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, watching the stars, content in each other's company. "You remind me of All Might, young man," Star and Stripe said one night, her voice quiet but filled with admiration. "Not just because of your strength, but because of your heart. He never let his power go to his head. He cared about the people, about the world he protected. I see that same spirit in you, Kal-El. That's what makes you special." Superman was humbled by the comparison. To be likened to All Might, the greatest hero in the world, was something he never imagined. But it also made him reflect on the path he was on and the responsibilities that came with it. He wasn't just training to be a hero. He was also training to become a symbol, a figure that people could look up to and trust. As their friendship deepened, there were moments when Superman thought about telling Star and Stripe the truth, that he wasn't just Superman, that he had another identity, one he had carefully kept hidden. But each time, he hesitated. He feared that revealing Clark Kent would complicate things and that it might change the dynamic between them. He valued her friendship too much to risk it, especially when they were just beginning to understand each other on a deeper level. Still, he couldn't deny the connection they were building. They began to rely on each other in ways that went beyond training. Star and Stripe, usually so self-reliant, found herself opening up to the young Superman in ways she hadn't with anyone else. And Superman, who had always felt a sense of isolation because of his powers, finally felt like he had someone who understood the unique pressures he faced. One evening, after an especially tough training session, they sat together, nursing their tired bodies. The normally composed heroine let her guard down. "You know, Kal-El," she said softly, glancing at him. "I've trained a lot of heroes, but I've never met anyone like you. There's something different about you. You're not just here to be strong. You care. That's rare." Superman smiled at her words, feeling the weight of her compliment. "I'm just trying to do what's right," he replied. "It's all I've ever wanted to do." "Well, you're doing a DMN good job," she said, her tone lighter, but the sincerity was clear. As the summer progressed, their bond only grew stronger. Star and Stripe had become more than just a mentor to Superman. She had become a true friend, someone who saw him not just for his powers, but for who he was. Despite their age difference, they found common ground in their dedication to heroism, their shared sense of responsibility, and their mutual respect. But even as they grew closer, Superman continued to hold back the truth about his other life as Clark Kent. He wasn't ready to reveal his secret identity to her, not yet. For now, he was content with the friendship they had built, knowing that Star and Stripe saw him as Kal-El, the hero she was helping to shape into something even greater. Though the truth remained hidden, Superman knew that in time, he might trust her enough to share that part of himself. For now, he cherished the bond they had formed and the knowledge that he wasn't alone in this journey to become the hero the world needed. On the other side of his identity, as the summer days passed, Clark Kent and Makoto Tsukachi's relationship deepened in ways neither of them expected. What began as a series of professional encounters had slowly evolved into a connection rooted in mutual respect and personal understanding. Clark, while continuing his work as a vigilante in training under Star and Stripe, also balanced his life as a reporter, where he found himself drawn to Makoto more with each meeting. Their initial discussions had been purely professional, focusing on the legalities of vigilantism, Superman's role in society, and the complexities of pro-hero regulations. Makoto's sharp investigative mind kept their conversations focused and serious, but as the days went on, there was an undeniable shift. They began meeting more regularly, and the tone of their discussions gradually became less about Superman and more about each other. At first, it was small, incidental moments that allowed them to bond, like Clark asks Makoto how she is doing after a particularly long day, or Makoto casually inquires about Clark's life as a reporter. Little by little, they started opening up. During one of their afternoon meetings at a quiet cafe in America, the conversation shifted unexpectedly. Makoto, normally guarded, began speaking about her struggles with her quirk. How knowing when someone was lying had shaped her relationships and made it difficult to trust even the people closest to her. "It's strange, you know," she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Back home, and even here, everyone assumes that because of my quirk, it is good for me to always know the truth. But it's more isolating than people realize. There's always this sense of distance, this feeling that I can never fully let my guard down, even with my family back home. It's exhausting sometimes." Clark, his empathetic nature always at the forefront, listened carefully. He had his own experiences with isolation, carrying a secret so monumental that it kept him from truly connecting with people. Without revealing his true identity as Superman, he shared his sense of alienation. "I can understand that," he said quietly. "Sometimes, when you have a part of yourself that's hidden from everyone, it's hard to let people in. Even when you want to, there's this constant fear of what might happen if they knew everything. It's lonely." Makoto looked at him, her expression softening. She had never expected Clark Kent, the unassuming reporter, to understand her on such a personal level, but his words resonated deeply. From that moment, their conversations took on a different tone. They no longer felt like formal exchanges between a reporter and an investigator but rather two people sharing their burdens. Clark found himself increasingly drawn to her. She was strong, determined, and fiercely intelligent, but there was also a vulnerability beneath her composed exterior that reminded him of his struggles. Makoto, in turn, appreciated Clark's kindness and sincerity. There was something in Clark Kent that calmed her. It was something that made her feel safe even when she was letting her guard down. Over time, they began talking about more than just their respective jobs. Makoto shared stories about her brother, Naomasa, and the pressures of being an investigator and a detective in a world where pro-heroes often took the spotlight. She confided in Clark about the challenges she faced balancing her work and personal life, especially with her quirk always looming in the background. Clark, though always careful to protect his secret, opened up about his life growing up in Smallville. He spoke about his parents, Jonathan and Martha, and how their love and wisdom had shaped him into the man he was today. He told her about his deep connection to his hometown, the quietness of the fields, and the simplicity of life there. Of course, he never mentioned his powers or his life as Superman, but he found comfort in sharing his human experiences with her. One evening, after a particularly long day of training with Star and Stripe, Clark found himself thinking about Makoto. He realized that despite all the weight of his responsibilities, as both Superman and Clark Kent, his moments with her had become a source of comfort. She was someone who didn't see him as a hero or an alien. She saw him as Clark Kent. The ordinary, human Clark Kent. Because most of the time they met, he would assume the identity of Clark Kent. Makoto, too, felt the connection growing between them. She began looking forward to their meetings, not just because of the professional curiosity she had about Superman, but because Clark was easy to talk to. He had a warmth that made her feel at ease, and for the first time in a long while, she found herself enjoying someone's company without the constant pressure of her quirk defining the relationship. As they grew closer, there was an unspoken bond forming between them. Neither of them voiced it aloud, but the way they talked to each other, the small smiles they exchanged, and the gentle teasing that had started to enter their conversations, all pointed to something more. Despite this growing closeness, Clark remained cautious. He knew that revealing his identity as Superman would change everything between them. He valued the connection they had built and didn't want to risk complicating it by introducing the truth too soon. Yet, every time they talked, he felt the pull to be honest with her, to show her the full picture of who he was. For now, though, he was content with the way things were. He cherished their moments together, even if a part of him worried about how long he could keep his secret hidden. The world knew Superman, but only Makoto was beginning to know Clark Kent. And that, for him, was enough, for now. As he reflected on his growing relationships as he stood on the front porch of the Kent farm, he saw a single leaf falling from a tree nearby. Summer is close to passing. Fall is coming.